We all know that the depth chart's going to look different at offensive line, wide receiver, especially cornerback, but maybe we should be focusing on what the quarterback room is going to look like.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Penn State fans? That is right. You are Locked On Nittany Lions. Thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, bringing you all things Penn State sports. And truly, that is the case because we welcome back a very special guest, and that is the voice of Penn State wrestling. Also now the program director, a host at Fox 98.7, Fox Sports 98.7 up in State College, Jeff Byers. Jeff, thanks so much for the time because we're talking wrestling in this show. Then the final segment, we're going to wrap it up with that. But we're also going to talk some football in the first segment. It's about the depth chart. But Jeff, thank you so much for the time again. It's great to chat with you.
No, thank you for the opportunity. I greatly appreciate it. And yeah, you don't have to twist my arm too hard to talk some football and wrestling. That's for sure.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And you can keep up with Jeff anytime you want to listen to him. Fox 98.7. Also, when he covers Penn State wrestling, anytime there's a dual meet, you can listen to him cover everything from start to finish and keep up with the show. Locked On Nittany Lions. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube for the latest Penn State analysis. Penn State wrestling's looking really good. Football has had a lot of turnover here, Jeff, but let's begin with what we think the depth chart could really look like in 2024, because they've made some, I don't want to say subtle changes, but Julian Fleming is only one piece of the puzzle. A.J. Harris, Jalen Kimber, and we begin with the offensive side of things, but you have the starting quarterback back. You have both of your co-starting running backs back. And for what it's worth, even though I've criticized the wide receiver spot, there's a lot of other people that have had some not so kind words about them. And I think it's been due. I really think that's one of the reasons that Penn State wasn't as successful in 2023, but only Julian Fleming really rocks the boat in this instance. I think we're going to see a lot of the same going into next season in terms of the hierarchy of the depth chart. And then tight end, now offensive line is going to have a shakeup because you're losing 3 starters in this case. But what position battles are you looking at? Because I think Julian Fleming does come in and start right away. Keandre Lambert-Smith is the one that gets bumped down the totem pole in this case because Trey Wallace still has some potential that we haven't seen because of the injuries. So Fleming, Wallace, Keandre Lambert-Smith is that third wide receiver. Are there any position battles, Jeff, that you're looking at, or some surprise names that'll escalate up the depth chart as the offseason progresses?
Well, let's start with what I think is the most significant change, which is getting Andy Kotelnicki in here as offensive coordinator. Yeah. And let's start, Zach, because I'm going to be interested to see how they handle the quarterback situation next year. Yes, okay. Drew Aller was the starter, returning, all the potential in the world, but we did not see him throw downfield this season, and I'm still scratching my head over that very much at all. And yep, the receiving core is certainly part of the equation there and part of why we didn't see that. But I think with what you saw in particular in the Peach Bowl now, my opinion only, but I think Andy Kotelnicki and James Franklin need to open up the quarterback battle. It may very well be Drew Aller, heads and shoulders, no questions asked, if you open it up. And listen, I'm not suggesting that I think Drew Aller should be relegated to second team, but it felt all year to me, Zach, like they did not use Bo Pribula the way they should have or could have. And I think you saw in the Peach Bowl and toward the end of the season what he can be. And Kotelnicki used a 2-quarterback system at Kansas. And again, I'm not suggesting that I think they should alternate series or anything like that. But I do think they need to get Pribula more involved. And listen, if he has a hot hand and Drew Aller has the deer in the headlights look that he had in that Peach Bowl game, then ride the hot hand. I don't think you need to be coddling Drew Aller. And that's what it felt they were doing to me this year. I felt there were several instances, and in the Ohio State and Michigan games in particular, where, okay, for whatever reason, it just doesn't seem to be working with him. Prabula is an entirely different type of quarterback. Bring him in. Let's see if he can, ignite something. And maybe you don't. Maybe it's just the same thing and it's a disaster and the other team's just better and that's the end of it. But I think it's worth having a serious long look and at least recognize that they bring an entirely different dynamic to the offense. And maybe in some situations against some defenses, Prabula is the answer. I just think that needs to be a bigger conversation than what it was throughout the course of the season. And Drew Aller needs to progress, right? I mean, he needs to be a better quarterback, a more consistent quarterback, certainly in the big spots next year than what he was this year for Penn State to take that next step or even, to be a team that is in the playoffs next year. I think that needs to be part of the equation. And I think receivers a big part of it. And Julian Fleming, you certainly hope adds a big component. And listen, I think having Fleming in there, if he is in fact the one, and listen, when Dante Cephas initially came in, that's what everybody was saying is Penn State now has their one. Little different situation. I understand, a little different background. And I'm more optimistic about Fleming being that guy. But I do think, part of what we saw last year with Trey Wallace, when he was out, it really affected that receiving core. And I think everybody had to jump up a spot and they just weren't ready to do that. Well, maybe Fleming coming in and having Lambert Smith be the 2 and Wallace kind of the 3, maybe that they're more comfortable in those roles. And I also think there's some things that maybe Kotelnicki can do scheme-wise to free those guys up a little more, give them a better opportunity to create the separation we're talking about. And then, listen, a guy like Cael Sanderson, I think, is a really interesting watch next year if he can take that next step and be a real factor in the passing game. You saw Liam Clifford, and I don't think Clifford's going to be one of your top 3 stars consistently, but that's a guy that has good hands. We saw again in the Peach Bowl, when you throw it to him, he's not going to have the explosive speed and the separation that you're looking for to break a game open. But man, there were a lot of times where Penn State needed that guy that can catch an 8-yard pass and make the chains move. And I think he's that type of a guy. And then, you need somebody, whether it's an Amari Evans or somebody, to start realizing their potential and kind of step up and start making some more plays. So I think it's possible the receiving core shakes itself out as the season progresses. I do think Penn State did a fantastic job in the transfer portal. I know it wasn't an overwhelming number, but I'm okay with that. I don't think you need to be disrupting a roster that is as close-knit and everybody kind of buying into the system the way Penn State is. And listen, both Fleming and Rucci, and really actually A.J. Harris for that matter, were very highly sought after by Penn State. And I think the Nittany Lions desperately wanted them coming out of high school and are very comfortable with the background check, if you will, in terms of how they're going to fit into the program. And I think that is a big deal. And I think if you looked at it, the 3 spots that I think in order Penn State was most in need of help, given the graduations and the folks that are moving on from the program one way or another. Wide receiver, certainly number 1. Fleming addresses that. Cornerback, in my mind, was 2. And Harris and Kimber, the kid from Florida, address that. And then the offensive tackle spot in particular, the offensive line, but the tackle spot in particular, to me, was something they had to address. And I think Nolan Rucci, again, seems like a really good fit there. And if, Drew Shelton can take that next step, I think that tackle spot suddenly becomes, pretty comfortable, if not depth-wise, at least, potentially with the starting lineup. And
I want to Jeff, real quick. I want to return though to what you said about quarterback, because I thought this conversation was going to be about, okay, where do the wide receivers in line? But we seem to agree with that. Now you're saying, Drew Aller shouldn't be, I guess in this case, just casually overtaken by Bo Prabula. Don't forget, Ethan Grunkmeyer comes in and he's enrolled early. I'm not implying that a true freshman is going to start over the former 5-star and another veteran within the program. Aller and Prabula are going into their 3rd seasons. But Kotelnicki, yes, used multiple quarterbacks. Part of that had to do with the fact that Jalen Daniels was banged up. That was part
Yes.
of it. But in Drew Aller's case, we still don't know exactly just how good he can be because of he protected the football. Now, you mentioned that Drew Aller doesn't like to throw down the field. Whether he was told that or he kept the football to himself is still yet to be seen. However, when Bo Pribula came in, my goodness, we never even saw him attempt to pass. So it's almost in a situation if you want to trust Bo Pribula because you're saying, well, we don't know what Drew Aller wants to do with the football. Is he hesitant? Bo Pribula is kind of the same case. We haven't seen him throw many pass attempts.
Yeah, here's the one thing I'll say about Pribula though, and Penn State was struggling to get the running game going the way everybody thought they would early. Now we saw it come on strong. I do think having that running quarterback, even if he's not much of a throwing threat, and I don't know that Pribula can't be that throwing threat either. As you said, we just one of the real disappointments about this season is you come out of it, I think, with a lot of the same questions you had coming into it. At the quarterback spot in particular, because we just never saw them, again, whether it was
do anything. We never saw them do anything.
We never even saw them try, right? Like not much anyway, in terms of, all right, let's put Pribula in there and surprise them, have them drop back and fire the ball, 40 yards downfield and see what happens. And so, yeah, part of it is I don't know that you know what you have. But I think if you're looking to jumpstart the running game, and if it is a day where Aller is struggling, and one of the disappointments to me, and again, I'm not pinning anything on Drew Aller only, but he did not have a game, at least not that I can think of, Zach, and you can correct me if you're remembering one, but he did not have a game where he struggled early and then came on, like turned it around. It was like, man, if he struggled early, it was just going to be one of those days where he struggled. Now, he didn't have many of them, but they were against, they were in the bigger games. And he just didn't seem to be able to work himself out of a funk. And again, it may be that the receivers weren't helping him and he was growing frustrated, but I thought his mechanics got away from him, in particular in the Ohio State game and in the Peach Bowl, where he was not following through on passes and just, little basic things that he wasn't doing. Yeah. And it just, I get any quarterback under pressure is different, but you hoped, I was hoping as the season went along, he'd get more comfortable back there and realize, hey, if you had pressure, even the two previous plays, you might not necessarily have that awareness about you as to whether there's not any real pressure there or not. And it just felt if you got pressure to him early, he felt it then the rest of the game, whether it was there or not. And so, part of it, again, let's see how he progresses. And I just think they need to use Pribula better in spots. And I think having a running quarterback out there can help open things up for your running back too. Just allows a little more misdirection, a little hesitation on the defender's part, where, with Drew Aller, the extended option element was never really a threat, and defenses didn't have to take it as such. Whereas Pribula, okay, now you got to wait that second. Does he actually have the ball, or did he actually hand it off here? I just think, again, it's the way they utilize the quarterback and the spots. And I think short yardage situations, to me, it just makes a ton of sense to get Pribula out there.
Coming up next, we have the same conversation, but about the defense. Are there any surprise names, especially the ones that Penn State got in the transfer portal, that could be at the top of the depth chart and still to come? Penn State wrestling 10 All-Americans named from this Penn State team. Very possible. That's all coming up here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. I know we come to sports to escape from the crazy realities of real life, but can we just talk for a minute about preparing for that real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. This is scary. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling if a family member or a loved one got sick while a supply chain issue kept them from life-saving medication that they needed. Thankfully, we're all going to be okay because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics that treat a long list of bacterial infections, including UTIs, respiratory infections, skin infections, among others. This stuff could happen to any of us. But you can visit jasemedical.com and complete your physician encounter for that peace of mind. It will be reviewed by a board certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important than to be prepared today. Go to jasemedical.com and use offer code locked on to get $20 off your order. That's jasemedical.com, promo code locked on to get $20 off your order. And the Locked On Podcast Network is making history. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus the national shows covering each and every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Talked a lot about the offense, and I feel like that's only scratching the surface with what we said about Drew Aller and Bo Perbula essentially being co-starters at quarterback. You still have Katron Allen, Nicholas Singleton, and then wide receiver seems pretty self-explanatory, and offensive line, even though there's turnover, you bring back Sal Wormley, you bring back Drew Shelton, JB Nelson, other guys that are veterans that will naturally just ascend in the depth chart. Defense gets a little bit different, though, because you're losing Chop Robinson. You're losing Adisa Isaac. You're losing veterans like Keaton Ellis. Oh, look at that. Curtis Jacobs is another one of a key part of last year's defense, a number one in the nation type of defense. So you're asking players, I think there's a serious open competition, especially at the cornerback spot that, and I already did an episode about this, Jeff. I already talked about, are we entirely certain that AJ Harris and Jalen Kimber start at those two cornerback spots because Tom Allen comes in? Cam Miller's been there for 3 years, but it's a brand new system, or I guess a tweak to the system. I feel like Tom Allen's going to have certain elements that still relate to what Manny Diaz did, but it's going to be in his own image as well. But I guess starting at cornerback, since that's kind of the biggest question mark on the depth chart here, KJ Winston's going to start again. Jalen Reed's going to start again. Zachy Wheatley's going to get a lot of playing time. Yeah. And they might even start 3 safeties. I'm curious to see if they go with a 4-2-5. But who are those cornerbacks on the boundary? I can't help but think that Elliott Washington and Cam Miller have a leg up on the competition because they have been there for 2 years. Granted, I know it's a new system, but Elliott Washington and Miller have both been with James Franklin at Penn State now, for Elliott Washington going in his 2nd season, but Miller being the veteran of the group going into his 3rd season. And those guys are former highly touted recruits. It's not like they're 3 stars that have worked their way up and earned their spot. They already had a very good profile to begin with. So what's the difference when you say, well, AJ Harris is a former highly touted 4-star. Some websites had him as a 5-star. Elliott Washington's kind of the same way. He was a highly touted 4-star as well. And from what I've been told and from what we've seen from the reaction of other players is that he might be the fastest on the team. So when you look at cornerback, is it just a given that, yes, AJ Harris and Jalen Kimber are going to start no matter what? Or do you think Cam Miller, Elliott Washington, maybe King Mack, Zion Tracy, try to give them a run for their money?
Well, yes, I think all of those guys, I think it is going to be a very good competition. I tend to agree with you. Let's start with Cam Miller, because fans suddenly seem disgruntled with Cam Miller, who has played very well when he's been in there. I get that in the Peach Bowl, it was a tough night. I am telling you, I don't know that they're going to face any quarterback receiver combination in the entire upcoming season as good as what they saw in that Peach Bowl.
Fair enough.
And listen, Miller went through that, and a lot of those plays, Zach, I didn't like. It wasn't like Miller played poorly and he just got.
He was okay. He was okay.
Yeah, and it was like, man, that guy made a great catch and was positioned perfectly. Like sometimes you do. I mean, fans never like to do it, and coaches grudgingly do it. But it's like sometimes you do just have to give credit to the other guy. It's like, wow, man, they were on. Like, that is a really good quarterback, a really good receiver, and they had it working. They were in sync that night. I think Cam Miller is just fine. Let's start there. I think Miller will be one of the starters.
Okay.
Now, I think I'm with you in that I think Washington has a leg up. I do think AJ Harris is the one I really want to see. I'm kind of excited / curious just to see. Okay, does a change of scenery get him to where? Because Penn State was really high on him coming out of high school, and
for good
so
reason.
and that's not to say, when it's all said and done. I mean, obviously, I haven't seen these guys up close, and I'm not watching them with any regularity. So maybe Jalen Kimber comes in and he's the one that wows everybody, and that's the guy that ends up being the leader of the quarterbacks this year. But it feels to me going in, I think Cam Miller is going to be one of your two starters, and I think he's really good. I think they're fine there. And then I think that the biggest thing to me with adding Harris and Kimber is now you actually have some depth at that cornerback spot.
Yeah.
Again, I thought they were going to be okay with Washington and Miller, but
okay is not good enough with what you have coming in from the Pac-12. All those pass-heavy offenses, you needed AJ Harris and Jalen Kimber because you might have to operate with 4 cornerbacks on the field. We might see more dime packages, meaning that there are 4 cornerbacks in this case, because Washington's going to do that. USC is going to do that. UCLA is going to do that. Oh, guess what? Oregon. I know they're not playing all of them, but they're playing 3 out of those 4 teams in 2024. So Penn State, either you adapt or you get left behind.
And listen, I think Zion Tracy is also. I'm curious to see if he can kind of progress into what. There's a reason they were high on him.
The teammates love him. They praised him a lot, specifically Zion Tracy.
Yeah, and so I think he's a guy too that can work his way in there. The other thing, Zach, that I wouldn't rule out, and I don't think it's as likely now, but before they got Harris and Kimber, I'm like, they're going to have to take one of those receivers and get them over on that side of the ball and figure out who the receiver could make that transaction the best is. And I have no idea who that would be because that's an entirely different world, obviously.
Right.
But I don't know that that's as likely, but I wouldn't rule it out still. If there's a guy there that they think, man, this is a big time athlete, but for whatever reason it's not working out at wide receiver. Let's at least take a look and see if maybe we can develop something there. If nothing else, depth wise, I think they're in good shape now, depth wise at cornerback. But the old coach's cliche that you can never have too much depth. I think you'd love to get to the point where you're 3 deep on either side, where you're comfortable there. And I think they're working toward that. But I do think it's going to be a fierce competition in terms of which guys will get the most playing time in the upcoming season.
The defensive line, I think, with Dennis Sutton essentially being a co-starter with Adisa Isaac, naturally vaults into that number 1 spot. And me and Vanover and Zariah Fisher, I think, ultimately will take over and split reps, split duties. You have Hakeem Beamon. You have Devon Ellis, who both came back, which was really good. I thought you had to go into the portal. You were able to re-recruit your guys to come back for one more season. And then you have Zane Durant, Jordan Vandenberg. So there's really no question marks there. The only other spot that I look at on this Penn State team is that 3rd linebacker spot that Curtis Jacobs is vacating. Is Tony Rojas ready to take over? You burned his red shirt. I would like to think so, but don't forget you have Dom DeLuca. Tyler Elsdon is still there as well. And then I know these guys. See, here's the thing with these linebackers. They can play any of the 3 spots. I would say Kobe King is almost the only one that's static as that Mike middle linebacker.
Yeah.
But Abdul Carter can slide around. And Keon Wiley has shown a lot of progress as well. I'm circling in on Tony Rojas, Jeff, and I'm saying, does he overtake Adam DeLuca, who was a captain this past season, albeit special teams, but seemed to be that 2nd linebacker up because of how good he is against the run, but at times a little bit of a liability in pass coverage. Tony Rojas had the interception against Maryland, showing some potential there. So this is the one that we need to key in on. Does Tony Rojas overtake Dom DeLuca to start and to play more? There's one thing about starting, but it's also playing more snaps, playing more reps. The 6th man plays more minutes in basketball than a starter from time to time. So is Tony Rojas ready to overtake Dom DeLuca and be the new Curtis Jacobs in a 4-3 look defensively? Because Kobe King and Abdul Carter will still start, but who's that next guy?
Yeah, I think it will be Rojas, at least getting more playing time. I would not be surprised if DeLuca is the starter, and that it is one of those things where it's some situational stuff where, all right, 3rd and short, let's get DeLuca in there, and we need to stop the run. Yeah, and if it's more, hey, we need a versatility with what we may need out of that spot, that it's Rojas. But you need Rojas to take that step. I think he will too. I think part of it, as we were watching Rojas throughout the season, and he was one of the guys we were kind of keeping an eye on. I really think, Joe Paterno used to talk about the linebacker spot in particular as being like driving a car, and at first you're looking at everything and checking the rear view mirror every 3 seconds, and then you get comfortable and you know what you're doing, and you just you're instinctive. And I think Rojas toward the end of the season got much more instinctive, much more comfortable with what he was doing. And this is another one where I'm curious to see how Tom Allen changes things up a little bit in terms of the strategy and the way Penn State plays defense. But I have to believe Rojas is, if not the starter, at least the guy that gets, my guess would be substantially more reps, certainly as the season wears on at that 3rd linebacker spot.
Well, and that's just it. With the younger players, they get better as the season. And I'm not saying the other players get worse, but the light switch starts to, it flicks on about halfway. Hypothetically, that's what you want with your really talented players, is that it clicks for them. And for Tony Rojas, I think that's an excellent point. Maybe to begin the season, the first 4 games, it's Dom DeLuca as that will taking over for Curtis Jacobs. But then when you play Washington, when you play UCLA, you're going to have to make adjustments. And then that's where Tony Rojas, because he is more athletic. Let's be honest here. Do I think Dom DeLuca is stronger and smarter currently? Yes. But do I think that Tony Rojas is faster and better in pass coverage? Absolutely. So you have to play based on the matchup. So there'll be co-starters. Like, I would rather have Dom DeLuca play against Illinois, have him be the starter. And then when Washington rolls around, you have Tony Rojas being ready to go in that instance. Don't leave him off the field just because it's Illinois, but be selective. And the coaches know that. They do. Now, Jeff, wrestling, Penn State has all of this uncertainty around it. There is no uncertainty when it comes to wrestling. I guess the uncertainty is just how many All-Americans can they have at the end of the season. There's a significant possibility that there are going to be 10. You're the voice of Penn State wrestling. You see it firsthand. We're going to discuss just that on the other side of this break. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel, the official sports book of Locked On. The NFL regular season has come to a close, but the playoffs are now here, and there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed, when you place a $5 bet. It's that simple. It is that easy. $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is super easy to use. I use it myself, and there are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. You can find bets in the all-new Explore tab and make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays. So those parlays are already made for you. The work is already done, and there's so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Remember, if you're not already, become an everydayer for the latest Penn State analysis. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, for everything football, men's basketball, men's hockey, now wrestling, the voice of Penn State wrestling with us. And if you want to keep up with Jeff, you listen to those broadcasts. You can also keep up with him at Fox 98.7, Fox Sports 98.7 FM in State College. Penn State wrestling, shutting a fresh off of the shutout against Indiana, not allowing a takedown by the Hoosiers. And I know this isn't Michigan. This isn't Iowa. I know that Indiana isn't exactly one of the most competitive when it comes to college wrestling. But I feel like for as good as Penn State, it almost seems like, is there really room for improvement? Because they're getting 7, 8 All-America considerations at the end of the past, just looking back over the past 5 years, the past decade, consistent national championships under Cael Sanderson. And it's like, how much better can it get? Well, now, Jeff, we are legitimately in the conversation of Penn State potentially having all 10 starters be All-American athletes by the end of the season. Do you feel like it's always been that way, or is there something different about this group in particular? Because from my point of view, as I don't want to say an outsider. I follow wrestling. Football's the closest one, men's basketball, but wrestling's up there as well. And from what I see, just Tyler Kasich, Messenbrink coming into the lineup when Alex Facundo was supposed to be the starter, takes that Olympic red shirt, and you think, okay, maybe there's going to be a little bit of a drop off here. Tyler Kasich, a true freshman. But as we've seen with Levi Haynes, that doesn't really matter. These young guys know how to come in right away and just take down the competition, whether they're ranked, whether they're veterans, it doesn't matter. So when you look at this lineup of 10, am I spot on by saying all 10 of these starters could ultimately be All-Americans at the end of the season?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that all 10 have that potential. And
Wow.
I do think in a couple of different ways, this is Cael's strongest team yet. Which means it's Penn State's strongest team yet in the 116 years now of Penn State wrestling. So I think top to bottom lineup wise, they as you said, they have All-American contenders at all 10 weights. Doesn't assure anything, doesn't guarantee anything. But at each of those weights, you look at the guy they have out on the mat now, and you say, yeah, I can see that. I mean, it's not crazy talk. There's a reasonable path for those guys. Obviously, I mean, 8 of them are ranked in the top, whatever it is, 4 or 5 now. So obviously, they would have a path to finishing in the top 8 at the end of the year. And the 2 that don't right now aren't ranked only because they are it wasn't clear to Intermat that they were the starters in Braden Davis and Tyler Kasich. But both of those guys, I think when they crack the rankings, will certainly be top 15 guys and probably top 10, which, by the way, Mitchell Messenbrink at 10. And I know, like, you got to prove yourself. I understand it. I don't know exactly where he falls, but it's much higher than 10. I feel confident in that in the overall pecking order there at 165. But the other thing is, and you see it with Kasich coming in. I mean, Shane Van Ness goes down, and then Tyler Kasich comes in. Across the board, this is by far the deepest team Penn State has had, meaning that if they do sustain an injury, now there's still a couple of weight classes. Like if Greg Kirkfleet goes down, they're in big trouble there at heavyweight. Yeah. But at most of the weight classes now, I'm not saying you have another guy that can step up and be a title contender, and not at all of the weights, even an All-American contender. But I think at just about, I would say at least 7 of the weights, you have guys that are going to go out, even in the Big Ten, and win a lot more often than they're going to lose. That is, I mean, it's just, you don't see that in this day and age of college wrestling with the 9.9 scholarships.
And like you said about depth, there's guys like Josh Barr who have all the potential in the world, but are blocked by wrestlers like Aaron Brooks. Okay. So there's no, but even I feel like Josh Barr would be able to hold his own at 184 as we've seen. So I'm not saying that Penn State, injuries happen and everything. That's not even, but the guys who are starting currently. And how about 125? Because one of the reasons this conversation hasn't really been had yet about Penn State having all 10 of the spots be All-America considerations at the end of the season is 125, for whatever reason, has been that weakest link. And Braden Davis now is pushing that into the conversation by being able to hold his own as we've seen from him in the lineup.
Yeah, one of the things that I think Cael and his staff are the best at, one of the many things, I guess, when it comes to coaching, but it is noticeable, even with a guy like Carter Starachi or a guy like Aaron Brooks. You're talking about a couple of 3-time champions, and when you watch them and the way they're wrestling this year, it is noticeable the improvement that they've made from the end of last year. Like, they are adding to their arsenal. I mean, they both went out and destroyed their competition at the NWCA All-Star Classic, taking on the 2nd and 3rd ranked kids at their weight class respectively. And I mean, it wasn't close. The separation is growing even though, again, you have great coaches and great wrestlers scouting, training to try to beat those guys, and it doesn't matter. They continue to separate. But even during the season, like Braden Davis is obviously wrestling very well right now. He is just scratching the surface of what his talent is going to allow him to do. He is figuring things out. This coaching staff is working with him every day, and he is a really coachable kid. And is learning, picking up stuff, making adjustments, is not caught up on, hey, I'm 10-0, I know what I'm doing. He knows there are great wrestlers out there. His goal isn't to be 10-0. It is to be on top of the podium in March. And he knows he's got to work his tail off. He's got a lot of improvement, a lot of growth he's got to make between now and mid-March to get to where he wants to be. But he is really focused on it. And again, that's up and down the lineup. Tyler Casack, you can see the same thing. And I think just with those freshmen in particular, the in-season growth is noticeable. I mean, Tyler Casack wrestled well, got the win at Oregon State. They came back and they worked on some things specifically with him to, hey, let's open up. Let's try some more things offensively. Well, man, did he ever against Graham Rooks on Sunday against Indiana. And those are just the things, again, those guys are going to continue to get better and better. I don't know where they're going to end up in terms of replacing and I'm not sitting here guaranteeing anything in terms of All-America honors, but I think both of those guys, because of, yes, the talent they have, but also the work ethic and the coachability they possess, are going to put themselves in a position to have a chance to, at the very least, score significant points for Penn State at the national tournament.
Let's talk Penn State and Michigan, because now this is okay. We can boast and brag and talk about how Penn State has actually turned the corner this season, believe it or not. Like I said, how much room for improvement is there? And they're showing that, but now they can put it again into the test in Ann Arbor. Okay, this one isn't in the Bryce Jordan Center. Michigan came to Penn State Happy Valley last season. Now they got to go out to Michigan. Michigan 4-1 on the season, but still a very good team year in and year out. It's the big three are always Penn State, Iowa, and Michigan. Penn State at the top. Iowa and Michigan can kind of figure it out, but it's usually Iowa at number 2. Michigan in this case, just when you think there's going to be a little bit of turnover, they lose some veterans, but they've shown no problem. I think about heavyweight. Of course, Mason Paris coming back, and he's the dominant figure after Gable Steveson leaves, and you think, okay, now Mason Paris is gone, and then welcome into the battlefield, Lucas Davison, which I'm really excited for, going up against Greg Kirkfleet. But Jeff, which matchups are you projecting to be the best? Because I know they have Cam Amin, Will Lewan, all those guys that Michigan still is able to sport. I think Penn State still wins this convincingly because there are some unranked wrestlers from Michigan. But if the Wolverines are able to maybe get some bonus points from their top wrestlers in the lineup, maybe it's a little closer. There's also home mat advantage. But back to the matchups, which ones do you have circled on the docket?
The two that I'm most excited to see are just, let's see where Braden Davis is, because again, very experienced. And Davis keeps passing. I feel like probably the last 3 matches I've said that with Braden Davis, is I want to see, how he kind of handles this next one. But this is a road environment against an experienced kid. Again, another great measuring stick, and he keeps, far surpassing any reasonable measurement when it comes to these tasks. But I think this is another good one. And listen, Tyler Casack, same thing. I mean, Austin Gomez feels like is in his 10th year. I think he came in at the same time Sean Clifford started Penn State football. And so, Gomez has been around the block for a couple different schools, and now with Michigan, and looked very good in his season debut here for the Wolverines. And so I think those ones I'm probably personally most intrigued by. I think, Cam Amin is interesting. If you didn't see the dual meet on Sunday, he got upset by Michigan State's Caleb Fish. And Fish is a funky wrestler. Like, that's not altogether shocking, but, certainly an upset. So Amin, is going to be focused, wanting to prove a point. And again, another very experienced wrestler against Mitchell Messenbrink, who obviously is coming on very strongly here for Penn State. I think that is probably from the outside looking in, the most fascinating or intriguing bout of the dual meet. Rankings wise, you have Shane Griffith, a former national champion, obviously for Stanford now at Michigan, and he's ranked, I think, 4th now in the Intermat rankings. Again, we talk about Carter Starachi. That guy has just taken another leap this season.
It's
and
crazy.
I just don't know that there's anybody, and that is a loaded weight class. I mean, Griffith is one of 5 or 6 like elite athletes there. Any given day, I get it, but I don't see anybody touching Starachi this season. He is just so dialed in right now and so on top of his game that I just don't see it. And heavyweight, I think Davison kind of same thing, very good. I don't think style-wise he matches up well with Kirkfleet, and I think Kirkfleet, the game plan is to stay out from underneath. But I think if Kirkfleet can get that first takedown, I just think he'll be able to control that bout as well.
Well, Jeff, as always, thank you so much for the time. Safe travels to Ann Arbor, and that one going down on Friday, January 19th. If you want to listen to Jeff, you can actually follow along at gopsusports.com. And when he's chatting about sports in general, that's over at Fox 98.7 In-State College. Jeff, thanks again for the time. Can't wait to have these conversations, as now Penn State is in the thick of it when it comes to wrestling. No more invitationals, no more dual meets against the teams that they're just gonna destroy. Oregon State, Indiana. This is the part of the exciting part of the schedule until they get to the tournaments themselves. And I'm glad we're back into it fully now in wrestling. So Jeff, thanks for the time and can't wait to do this again.
Thank you. Appreciate it.